Ethics in Albany. All right, stop the punchline here. The fight to reform ethics, it does continue. And as we know, there's a lot of strings attached here. Lawmakers scrambling to finish the state budget by April 1. Looking like they're getting close to a deal on ethics reform. Details sketchy at this point, but maybe we can get some clarity. We all know Governor, he threw down an edict here. I've spoken to lawmakers from both sides who say either one of two things. One, the disclosure stuff either goes too far, or two, why is it that the governor's demanding out of the legislature something that he won't even impose in the executive branch? What do you think the big stumbling block, almost regardless of party, is from the governor's proposal? Is it A or B?
Well, I think the question has moved to C, which is that the Assembly and the governor reached an agreement on ethics. And it took a lot of work, and we both compromised, and we reached an agreement that requires more disclosure of outside income, particularly as it affects attorneys. And that really stemmed in part from Shelley Silver's indictment and the issues related to disclosure of who his clients were. So we reached a package deal on ethics. There would be far greater disclosure, not only for attorneys, but for others about outside income. There already is a requirement about outside income disclosure. The Senate has been the holdup. So, let's just make clear. We wanted to get it past us. We knew we had to make a statement. People are very fed up with what they perceive of as going on in Albany, and they're understandably upset. And I think from the point of view of the Assembly Democrats, we wanted to take this issue off the table. We reached a deal. The Republicans in the Senate have been very reluctant to disclose any of the clients their firms have as in detail. And yet the New York State Bar Association said that the disclosure that we agreed to was ethical, which is basically if you're working on a case involving a client and you make more than $5,000, with certain exceptions, you have to disclose the name of the client. And unless there's some reason for an exemption.
How about when it relates to spouses or family members? Should disclosure be required of them too if they're getting any state business?
Well, currently under state law, the spouse, you have to disclose your spouse's sources of income if they're regulated by the state, for example, or if your spouse receives money that is directly related to a state interest. This change was more for the members of the legislature, not the spouses. But we went quite far, and it took a tremendous amount of work. And credit to our speaker, Carl Hastie, who, insisted that we find a way to compromise, and the governor made a compromise too.
Is there a sense that you're going to have a budget on time?
I think so, but I would call the Republicans out on this because they were behind the eight ball in the Senate. They were reluctant to have this disclosure. We have to restore trust that people are not taking money in their law firms or in their outside practice that is somehow influenced or influences their roles as legislators. So we have to do it. I think we will. I think they're going to come to an agreement. But it's time to get this. We've got to move on from ethics.
You've been in Albany and you've been in Washington. You've seen dysfunction firsthand here in more than one capital. Compare the two.
Oh, it's so different. It's so different. First of all, I think in Washington there's more diversity, and I don't necessarily mean that in a good way. I mean there's more people doing their own thing who, just seems alien to us in New York. I mean, it's just amazing. Sometimes I hear some things coming out of the voices of some of my colleagues, and I think, oh my God, what planet are they living on? Also in Albany, believe it or not, you have a much stronger leadership. It's the way the system is set up. The speaker is much stronger than the speaker in Washington. Most people would find that strange.
People have been critical of the 3 or 4 men in a room that is Albany, unlike Washington.
Right.
You've seen both. Which works better?
Well, I think each can be dysfunctional. I think there's something to be said about someone who can have a firm leadership, but I also think you don't want it to be too firm. You don't want it to be a dictatorship. We did something, rare thing, yesterday in Washington, in that we were able to. Well, John Boehner and Nancy Pelosi actually agreed on it. and we passed it. It's called the doc fix. It's complicated to some degree, but it's how much doctors are reimbursed from Medicare patients, because they will stop taking Medicare patients if their fees aren't reasonable. And so the problem with Boehner is he's had his Tea Party people, the right wing of his party, thwart him at every turn. He doesn't have enough votes if he loses them. So this time he took Democratic votes, put them together with Republican votes, and made a...
It seems every time he breaks the fever, though, it seems temporary. And you know, Dominic, the one thing, we talked to Albany and Washington, we didn't talk about the City Council of New York. That would be a whole nother bag of worms, right?
Sure would.
Congressman, I know you have a lot going on tonight here. I appreciate you coming in,
Always a pleasure.
breaking down the Middle East for us, and much more. Okay, it also takes us to our online question of the day. And I want you to head over to Facebook and Twitter, sound off on the question. How can Albany fix these issues relating to ethics? And you heard from the Assemblywoman here that they're making real progress. It's now at the state Senate level. I want to know from you folks if you think it's going to break the fix. So when we come back, I'll ask the Assemblywoman about an issue our guest is going to speak about in Westchester, but it's really statewide, if not nationally. Elderly folks being scammed, and you'd be surprised how many folks are here. We'll talk to the person from the Attorney General's office who's trying to stamp out financial elder abuse in New York. Stay with us.